Never seen a smile so big on my little old lady's face until I tell her I'm going fishing all weekend. Pack up all of my bait and I make plans for 7:45 and I swing around, pick up my date for the weekend. Some reason she seems to please when I'm leaving. There's something I'm missing when I'm gone fishing. When I'm gone fishing. When I'm gone fishing.
Yeah, baby.
Yes, sir. Well, good evening, CFN. We have a really exciting show tonight. If you love salmon, if you have been one to target salmon, you have trolled the Great Lakes for salmon, or maybe on the West Coast and you want to learn a little bit more about salmon, this might be your show. I have the luxury of course, being accompanied with Big Jim, Lawrence, and Jay, but they brought a special guest with them. Jay has Mark Penner from Grimsby Tackle. So what we're going to do is we're going to sort of go chronologically through where salmon started, how they originated, what was the purpose of them coming over here, which I'm sure some, if not all of you may know. If you don't, you're going to learn something tonight. What they started with, how they started with the stocking, this, that, and everything else. But it's going to be a show that is dedicated to salmon. And first and foremost, I would have loved to have had perhaps a couple charter captains on. I had a busy on call this weekend, and I want a big shout out to my buddy Chris Church, who is looking after my on call for the next couple hours while we do this. So I don't want to spend a lot of time on announcements because there's a lot of discussion, and we want you folks to be engaged and to add, your thoughts. When we get to Jay and Mark's segment, that is where we're going to be talking about what is different between this year and last year when it comes to salmon fishing, because for those who do fish or have been following what's going on the Great Lakes, especially Lake Ontario, it has been an off the charts kind of year in terms of catch, harvest, catch rate, number of fish caught, size of fish caught. Like, it has literally been something that I personally have never seen in the years that I've been fishing, and I'm not sure if others have themselves, but this has been a unique year, and we want to kind of dive in and find out what is so different. What has turned the switch on this year's salmon fishery? So again, looking forward to hearing some of your ideas, some of your theories. Perhaps you have science behind it. Maybe you're a guide, you're a charter captain. As I said, do not hesitate, because we'd love to hear your take. And it's a kind of a cool way to pump your tires. So if you do have a charter company and you go under that under Facebook, by all means, we would love to see all of the charters and guides out there. And feel free to post them in the comments in case you want to give them an extra shout out. At the end of the day, this is all about salmon. Good evening, Steve. How you doing, my friend? We got Jim Wilson, who took Steve and I out not too long ago. We had a fantastic day. Tony's in the house. How you doing? Jay is backstage. Manny, how you doing? Sparkus is in the house. Lloyd, yeah, baby. And, of course, our beloved Ed McKenzie, who has done a fair share of trolling for these fish himself. So, again, interested to hear what you have to say, Ed, as well as anybody else, all those who perhaps have an opinion, and I'd love to hear it all. This is going to be dedicated more so to you folks than us, because we want your input. We really want to hear what you have to say. Just to get through a few announcements, and it's going to be real quick because, as I said, tonight I just want to talk salmon. CFN Fish Off, as you know, Tourney Tuesday is every Tuesday, and this week is no different. So we are going to be joined by the likes of our good buddy Mike Consul tomorrow for Tourney Tuesday for a CFN Fish Off update. And here's Mike to tell us more.
Hey everyone, happy Monday. It's Mike Consul, and I'm here to invite you to join Scotty and I for Tourney Tuesday tomorrow, 7:30 Eastern, because we're giving away another Shimano Next Save combo. But if you haven't signed up yet, did you know we're giving away some Stradics? We're giving away a Sedona. We're giving away some Mirabelles. So sign up. There's still time. You can sign up anytime between now and August 5th, which is long weekend Monday. So next Monday is the last day to submit all your fish, because every single fish you submit is a ballot into various Shimano draws. And if you have that competitive bone in your body, multi-species madness is happening right now. The current pot is $1,160 to the first place winner. Second, third, fourth, and fifth also win cash, and first, in addition to cash, wins a Shimano Stradic. So all that and more we are going to talk about tomorrow, Tourney Tuesday, 7:30 Eastern. Join us. You might win a Shimano Next Save or other Shimano prizes. See you there. Take your kid out fishing. Have fun. Tight lines.
Right on. As I said, we have our Horwood Lake Lodge CFN 6th annual retreat coming up very shortly, where we are going to enjoy fishing like this. Camp is fully booked. It starts on the 11th of August. It goes a week, and I can't wait. I was just talking to Walt. We're already making arrangements to get up there. Really looking forward to it. It is always a highlight of the summer. Another highlight of the summer, and I'm happy to say is fully booked as well, is Camp Mac. And if you were there last year or you were thinking of coming this year, we would love to have you, but unfortunately the camp is booked. So for all those who did join us last year, you'll see how good the fishing is at Camp Mac.
Yeah, baby! Macintosh 2023!
A little bit of time left. If you want to book a trip to either Horwood or Camp Macintosh, there are still spots available. Unfortunately, just not for our CFN retreat at Horwood or our OFC Nation retreat at Camp Mac. But there's still lots of time to go. Still lots of time to experience some great fishing at those two great venues. And of course, the owners are fantastic. They're going to treat you like kings and queens. They're going to feed you like you haven't eaten in days. It's going to be a lot of fun. We look forward to it. So we got Big Jim coming up right after his opening.
When he was born, he tried to reel in the umbilical cord. Bass named him as their personal best. His power pole came with a stripper. Forward-facing sonar uses him to find fish. Chuck Norris is his co-angler. He is the most interesting fisherman in the world. Stay fishing, my friends.
There he is, the one and only Big Jim McLaughlin. Jim, how you been, Jim?
Got my new shirt on.
Attaboy.
Got one that fits now.
That's hilarious.
So I said to a buddy of mine the other day, I hadn't seen him in a while, and like, whoa, he's been eating, eh? And I told him, I looked at him and said, those shirts come in bigger sizes.
That's hilarious.
Well, he
That is-
looked like a cottage roll. Like the shirt was so tight on him.
Yeah, I have that same problem sometimes when triple XLs aren't triple XLs and then some. But it's always interesting to find out how shirts fit. And for us,
Well, I just had Moose get me a whole bunch of Shimano and Luma stuff done up.
good.
And it was nice because I got the t-shirts in long because I got short little legs. My legs, like my inseam's only 30 inches. I'm all torso.
Okay.
So when I get a regular t-shirt, I tuck it in my belt, put my arm over my head, and it's out, right?
Yeah.
So I got to get everything that's longer.
That's funny stuff. Jim, because we're talking salmon, and this isn't a fish that you've spent a lot of time, as we know, targeting, but you have you've certainly had your days
up to 11 days.
You certainly
not this year.
Holy smokes, your hands are black. What have you been doing?
Tying fluff. It's fluff fest. And they're just sort of like permanently black. The dye doesn't want to come off them. And I just washed them like 2 minutes ago.
I was just going to say, did you get fingerprinted? Is there another story in there that we're going to hear?
Now they've got that enough. They don't need it.
Oh, that's funny stuff. So yeah, I'm interested because, you were probably, I think you were either in grade school or just getting into high school when they were starting to get introduced into the Great Lakes. Both you and I shared some knowledge that we've learned.
When we had talked about it, Scotty, it brought it back to me. And I remember because I was a young kid in high school, and here I was down the Rideau Canal every day trying to hawk out a carp or something, or whatever you could get to bite on a worm and everything else. And I remember all the hype as a kid about salmon fishing and how shocked we're going to have salmon and everything. And then, we started thinking about it. I went and looked at a couple of things quick, and I knew from the past that they were originally put in to help combat the alewives. Mm-hmm. That's the thing behind it. I think it was we figure somewhere in the late 60s or something.
Yeah, it was definitely in the 60s. I don't know. I know Lawrence has gone through the timeline, so we're going to get an accurate timeline.
It was about 1970 or something, which just when I was in high school, that they started putting in the Chinooks and other fish over in Lake Huron and Ontario. And, I guess at first it didn't work that well. That's why they complemented it with that, they started building hatcheries and stuff. But I know Vito de Tomo, the Lord of the Kings. Vito was a wondrous salmon trawler. He knows how to do it, eh? Mm-hmm. And he told me one day we were out, he was pointing at a place on the shoreline. And he said to me, I remember as a kid them seeing front end loaders picking the dead fish off the shore there, the alewives, because they would die with the temperature fluctuations. I think is what caused it. Well, that's what I was told. Yeah. That they would die and they would drift on a shore and it would stink the whole place out. And they would come down with big front end loaders like you see in a pit, scoop them up and take them to the dump or whatever they did with them,
And if you fast forward to where we are today, some would suggest that the salmon fishing out on Lake Ontario in specific it can rival that of what's going on our west coast, which to me is hard to believe that the fishing is that good. But as I said,
Captain Greg told me we've been talking a lot lately, and because we want to get out walleye fishing again in the fall. And he said to me, Jimmy, he said, I had days where the clicker doesn't lie. Mm-hmm. He had a lot of days so far between 50 and 60 fish in the boat.
Wow.
It's nonstop.
Wow.
Mind you, he's a pretty good salmon fisherman. You know what I mean? He's as good as anybody else out there. There's nobody that's better than him. But it's like everything else. It's especially things in the big water like that. They seem to do this a little more. Yeah. And I know Mark had mentioned some stuff there he's going to talk about. I don't need to repeat what he mentioned to us, but you don't realize certain things out there that go on with lifespans and stuff, and he'll elaborate on it. But it's just really cool. And like I mentioned to him about the stores, I watched over the years the stores go from being all walleye stuff and bass and pike to being 50% salmon now. Like you go to Gagnon Sports, you go to Grimsby Tackle. Like I said to Mark, I said, would Grimsby Tackle exist if there wasn't a salmon fishery? And he said, probably not.
Yeah.
Like, that's how powerful this fishery is, and the economic impact in the fishing industry and the local stuff. I mean, it's huge money. The hotels, the gas, the traveling. Should Jim Wilson spare tires?
Yeah, true enough.
I hope you're not listening. But, I've never
Yeah.
seen anybody go through so many tires. He's so
I know.
unleashed with tires. God.
Well, you see the amount of driving that he does for his clients. It's
Yeah.
absolutely remarkable.
Yeah, he's just back and forth all the time. Yeah.
Great, Jed. Fishhawk.net is a great charter. If you are looking to get out on Lake Ontario, Jim is a great contact. Greg Emile is another. But again, Brad, if he was here, our good buddy at Pow Castings, he'll tell you how the salmon have helped his business when it comes to his Titans and other downriggers.
Yeah, because I saw the other day, Gagnon's had a big ad that they just got in a big shipment of them. Like, just all his stuff was laid out there on the floor. Obviously, they don't put it on the shelf because the shelf couldn't hold it. But it's absolutely amazing. And like I said, like the economic impact is offside. I know some guys that have, they used to live for the winter in Quinte. Now the winter's still good to them, but all they care about is the salmon season.
Yeah.
Because the doors in the rooms are like this.
100%.
Put in revolving doors, and it's just nonstop. It's just absolutely incredible. And it's not just like we're talking about captains and that, but it's amazing because the amount of individuals that have become pretty good salmon fishermen.
Mm-hmm.
Like, it's not just captains that drive all this. You need thousands of people, and there's a lot of weekend guys out there. I mean, you see guys going into, I see them going into all the different shops along the 401. Like I told you about Stacy at Pro Tackler. I mean, he didn't sell salmon stuff. Then all of a sudden he had a couple of Dodgers, and he was selling a little bit of stuff. That was a few years back, and now half his store is all salmon stuff now.
With as good of a year as it has been, especially here in Lake Ontario, I'm interested to see how good that fall run is. And I know with the rains that are I think coming, those runs might start a little bit sooner than we may have anticipated. But I can't imagine the opportunities that shore anglers are going to have this year. If the run is that good out in the lake, these fish got to get upriver. I can only imagine how many fish we're going to see.
Yeah, no, it's true. Like, I know it's all like a lot of it because it really wasn't overly successful for the reproduction from what I looked at. And so they augmented obviously with the stocking.
Yeah.
But what you've probably seen happen is maybe they've had really good years of natural reproduction. I mean, when you see some of the fish that they got in Coburg there, guys are, chucking those fish in nets and lugging them up, and the ones that don't get through and things like that. You see Pete Cito out there doing that, and I'm sure it's one of those things. It's going to be absolutely, off the deep end, and maybe it's for a couple more years to come.
100%. It's going to be interesting to see, and as I said, the fall run is going to be indicative of what the state of the fishery is in Lake Ontario, and I'm sure all other tributaries and Great Lakes that have salmon in them. But take us back, Jim, because I know, and I was looking so hard for that picture or that video when you were out fishing with Walter from the Toronto Sportsman Show. Mm-hmm. There was only a few pictures that I was able to find. This was the one that I could show because the other one, the quality wasn't that good. So I know you've been out enjoying salmon fishing.
Oh yeah, no. I like I said, I think it's 10 or 11 times I've been out in my life. This was one of the best days ever. That's my buddy Donnie Walsh from Down South Blues Band. We've been friends forever. It's him and his brother that inspired the Blues Brothers with Aykroyd and Belushi. Eh?
No way.
Yeah, you didn't know that?
No.
Oh yeah, I got to meet Belushi at his house, and I've got to meet Aykroyd a few times. The last time I was with Donnie in Kingston at the Blues Festival, Tammy and I were there, and he had a little cabin or little caboose out the back there, trailer. And this was a few years ago, probably about 10 years ago. I think it was the first year we moved here, maybe. It was close to it anyway. And Dan Aykroyd came in. He came in to do a little cameo with Donnie, and it was so funny because he gets out of a car in the back. They drop him off, and I'm in the trailer with Tammy and Donnie and a couple of guys from the band, and Dan came in the door with the briefcase handcuffed to his hand.
Jeez.
Right in the Blues Brothers thing.
Come on.
Oh yeah, full go. And then they go out and they start playing some songs, and all of a sudden here comes Dan slinking by, because we went to the same high school. I didn't know him, but I knew his brother Peter, and we had a long talk about Peter. Peter became a big time producer in California and everything. Like, the family hit the show business, eh? But yeah, no, Donnie's a character. He just loves it. No, Bob kill. Yeah.
That is, Terry, I'm with
Anyways,
you.
I gotta go.
I didn't know this.
At 8.
All this time that I've known you, I didn't know this. This is so cool.
You didn't know that Donnie and his brother Rick were the Blues Brothers from North Bay. Like,
I had no idea.
Yeah.
Wow.
Oh yeah, Donnie and I were together because I was the bouncer at a pretty shady bar in Ottawa, and that's how I met him.
Holy smokes.
Yeah. The first night that I met him, we got into big time cocktails after the bar closed, and we went to Harvey's. And Donnie used to wear a big fur coat in the wintertime.
Yeah.
We woke up. Oh God, no. We woke up behind the dumpster at Harvey's.
Okay, so this is why I thought the black on your fingers was possibly you getting processed this past weekend.
No. Oh yeah, no, he used to bring the whole band over to the house, and
wow.
Because I've been so blessed to meet these guys, and it was because of fishing. Well, actually, I met Donnie in the bars, but it was fishing because we've gone fishing so many times together. Like, we had him on the cover of Just Fishing, and everything else. It was just really, really cool. But he's a great guy. I've probably spent like 150 days on the water with him. 100 days. Like, I'm talking a pile of days.
Wow, that's
a pile of days. Because whenever he traveled,
yeah,
we used to travel. I mean, when he was playing in Ottawa, I remember one day him coming over with the truck that they moved the band's equipment in, and I was still a bouncer, and I bought the aluminum boat, the famous boat where I'm standing in it.
Yeah.
And we put the boat in the back of it and went. Hang on, I got to show you. I got to grab a book.
See, this is the best part of spending time with Jim. You start with a topic, and then it digresses and it goes its own little way. And I'm learning a whole bunch of stuff here that I didn't know about Jim. So this is really, really cool. I also wanted to say, Mike, great question. These are all great questions that I'm going to save for when Jay comes on, because I know he's going to be able to answer these. At least I'm hoping he will. So if you can circle back and re-ask those questions, or I'll try and look for them in the comments. But these are really, really cool questions.
I can't find the book. There was a book Ontario Out of Doors did a book that they sent you with the subscription.
Yeah.
And there's a picture of me standing in the boat. And there's a guy beside me that's in this booklet, and it's Donnie, and he's so hungover he can't move.
That's hilarious.
And I got a chance I'm just flogging away for all I'm worth, right?
That's
but
hilarious.
We were like this, and it was really sad. I think I told you now, Donnie's got some issues with aging diseases.
Yeah.
And last time I talked with him, it was really sad because I heard him cover the phone and say, "Who is this again?"
Wow.
And yet he goes on the stage and he doesn't miss a beat or a lick or a word or a note. Not a thing,
That's
just,
incredible.
Certain little things he forgets, but God love him. I love him right to death.
Well, some of us were put on this earth to do something, and you were definitely put on this earth to fish and spread the passion for angling. But I'm interested, Jim, as I said, take us back to when the talk must have started. So, of course, you were a little young yet, and then, of course, you started fishing for muskie and walleye as a young angler. But I'm interested to hear, what was the take some anglers had when it came to the introduction of salmon in the Great Lakes? Were they for it? Were they concerned? Were they against it?
I think they just wanted to eat them. I'm serious. I knew guys that used to go down to try to catch salmon from Ottawa. And, this would have been maybe 45 years ago, 40 years ago. They would go down like every weekend. There was guys out in 14-foot tin boats. you know?
Yeah.
That's what they did. They wanted to catch a salmon, and of course they weren't really set up to do it. You know, they're trolling a jointed Rapala with a sinker, but nobody knew how to do it yet.
That's
And
hilarious.
all of a sudden, all the products started showing up, and then like I said, it just blossomed. But man, there was a hype on that when I was just into fishing and getting going with it. Because I remember when I used to write for Ontario Out of Doors at the time, and Ontario Fisherman, Daryl's magazine,
Mhm.
and I'm looking through it, there'd be all these guys holding these salmon, these great big giant salmon, and I'm looking like, oh, geez, I'd like to catch one of those, you know, like
Yeah.
big fish, and they're still like they're the fightingest fish in that water. There's no
100%.
doubt about that, you know, like
And I want to say that's kind of when it really hit home for me was like mid 80s. Mid 80s was when for me it was like, oh, there's that kind of fishing going on out in
yeah.
I think it
And
was
they always tried to compare it to BC. Everybody from out west hated Lake Ontario because of the way it blossomed. I used to talk to guys out there, and they say, "Oh yeah, but they're not like the West Coast fish."
yeah.
You know, now it don't mean anything. It's what it is. You know, I think it's just when something's new. I think they kind of felt threatened. You know, who knows? Maybe a lot of people stayed home. I don't
Well,
know.
this is the thing, and that's what's so intriguing about this because they've been around for a while now, and we all know that fishing and the fish themselves, it's cyclical. They have good years, they have bad years, but this year in particular, and thinking back, Jim, have you ever been a part of any discussion like you have been this year, or heard folks chatter about the salmon fishing? Have you ever heard it being this good as it is this
I
year?
don't believe so. I'm sure there's other years because we weren't involved with social media and you didn't get to hear it.
Yeah.
Except from your buddies. We hear a lot more. We have a lot more information comes to us, every day now. But, I knew guys that were going from Ottawa every Friday afternoon at 4:00. You could see them go by the house. You know what I mean? They'd be leaving with the boat and they were gone.
Yeah.
And then boats got bigger. Then they got down riggers. Then they had then they were getting F-16 drafts, which were the paper graphs. You used to have to put the paper in, and it always just to get jammed. It never worked right, and if it was too wavy, it didn't work. Whatever else, at least it didn't beat the pixel. So I just loved it because it didn't lie. And then guys found out how to make the fish look bigger. Is you slowed the graph way down and sped up the boat. It made the fish look huge. If the fish was the size of the boat, it was just like really, really cool. Yeah, like the 90s. That would have been the end of what I experienced with it.
And it's true. Like the 90s definitely were there. But I want to say that for me as an angler, it was about the mid 80s when I saw Ontario Fishermen. I saw some of these resources that, I just couldn't get enough of. I'd buy every single one of them off the shelf just because I was just so into fishing. And
yeah, I used to buy it and I didn't even do it. There was hype.
Yeah.
There was hype about it, eh?
Yeah. And I would say like what has happened this year is unique in my opinion, and I'm hoping it is for others who are also seeing what we're seeing. And we want to kind of dive into why. Jim, before we let you go, we still got a few minutes, but I would love to hear, what is it you think might be different about this year than other years?
Well, I'm sure it just has something to do with spawning and the stocking that they do.
Do you think COVID played into this at all? Not being able to necessarily get out?
Because so many people went fishing and would have kept fish. I don't. Maybe I'm wrong. I don't know. But see, I remember. You got to remember, I lived through the days of the Black River.
Mm-hmm.
Bill Safe, all the salmon fishing in the east end of Lake Ontario. Mm-hmm. I mean, you went to the Black River when they still allowed snagging. You couldn't find a spot on the bank to try to fish or snag from.
Yeah.
There was cars, there was people, every hotel was jammed. People had signs on their front lawn, parking $4 for the weekend. Like, it was a long time ago.
Yeah.
Things like that. All the little motels, there was restaurants opened up, little greasy spoon restaurants. Bill Safe's cameraman, Wink, he opened up a restaurant and a bed and breakfast.
That's incredible.
That's how powerful it was. It was absolutely huge, I mean, you talk to the customs guys that were here on the Thousand Islands Bridge, and it was, oh my God, not Sunday afternoon, because they were all coming back.
Yeah.
they were all coming back at the same time, right? So
And then all of a sudden we saw, the bloom of tournaments. One that I would say stuck with me in the very beginning, of course, was the Great Ontario Salmon Hunt that went on every year that the Toronto Star would sponsor. And, the amount of prizes that were available through that, the car
and the exposure.
and the exposure. Because I would have to say that the Great Ontario Salmon Hunt, in my opinion, and you can offer yours, Jim, that to me was the flagship of the salmon fishery that we now.
No offense, or buts.
Yeah.
And to this day, there's still nothing touches it. I don't see it in public. If it is there, I'm not seeing it.
Yeah. I would have to say that's what engaged me. And of course, it was sponsored too by the Toronto Sportsman Show, and Walter always did a fantastic job at the show promoting it. It worked. It was one of those things as a young angler sort of coming up through the ranks, I took notice to, and I said, well, if we're going to promote anything, we have to model what the Toronto Sportsman Show has done, the Toronto Sun has done, or Toronto Star has done, and of course the Great Ontario Salmon Hunt, because the promotion of Lake Ontario's salmon fishery couldn't have been done any better by those three entities.
No, it was monster.
Yeah.
It was monster. You could make any fish a star with that type of promotion and ongoing stuff, eh? But like I said to you, I mentioned it again, the Black River.
Yeah.
And that was the economic impact of that. And then it gave birth to all the charter boats. Well, not all. I'm sure there was some out there before doing other things, but it was for salmon now. And like I joked to you earlier about the guys that I knew that had, $200,000 a boat worth of boat sitting there, and they were guiding 4 times a year and writing the boat off. And, the tax people came and took note.
Yeah.
You can't write off a $200,000 boat as a business and have, 3 or 4 years in a row of doing that and be declaring 4 charters. That doesn't work,
Yeah.
And a lot of that went on, right? I saw it happen with my own eyes in Kingston. I was shocked to see, So
and another thing that's interesting too, we talk about your smallmouth fishing, your prowess during tournament time. To get a 3-pound smallmouth was difficult. That was a great fish. And then you showed me the results of the CSFL on Lake Simcoe this past weekend, where holy smokes.
Yeah, Chris Johnson fished with his dad on Sunday afternoon. They weighed in a couple ounces shy of 30 pounds.
Yeah.
And they didn't have, they had big fish, but it was like 596 or something.
Yeah.
So all the fish that they had were just under 6 pounds.
100%.
They didn't have a giant fish. They didn't, even it wouldn't make a difference that when the weight's getting that big, they all have to be big.
Yeah.
But it's hard to imagine that, even a person of that caliber can go out and catch. And I sent him a quick note, and he told me how we culled a few too, right? Had the balance beam them. So
it's incredible. And so to that point, when it comes to salmon, I'm seeing that a fish in the teens in terms of weight is a decent fish. You get kings that are in the 20s, mid 25s, and of course Ed mentions that his best was a 38. And I'm beginning to wonder, was the size of salmon that Lake Go was producing bigger back then than it is now, or are we?
I believe so. My biggest one actually weighed on a scale was 37 pounds 12 ounces.
Jeez.
That was my biggest one. So see, Ed says that's his biggest one. So that's how big they got back then when there was and I mean, there was a lot of people caught fish that were pretty close to that now.
Incredible. Yeah, Mike, you're bang on right that to me anyway, and I know Jay's going to back this up. The numbers are there, and we're seeing it just based on the kind of fishing that is being.
See, I think they grew so big back then too because of the amount of alewives.
Well, this is it.
I mean,
right?
like when you can scrape them off the shore dead with a loader.
Yeah.
People hear me joke about the walleyes going out of the Bay of Quinte, opening their mouths, swimming around Carleton Island for the summer and coming back in Lake Ontario. Well, you'd have to have your mouth open for a long time now to get fat compared to back then. Back then, you wouldn't have got out past Grape Island, and you would have had enough fish in your stomach to last you the summer. It was absolutely nuts. I watched it. It was nuts,
And
it never really caught me though.
What's that? Nobody ever caught.
I know it never caught me like salmon fishing.
Oh, I got you. Okay.
Never got in my blood to want to go do it.
Yeah.
When the guys were going out, I'd go out and sit in the boat because I was usually on boats that were like 45 feet long or something. So it was pretty nice. You'd go out for the day, maybe just stay out for the night and fish in the morning again or whatever.
100%.
Yeah. It's
no, you're right, Ed. 40 pounds. I do remember the 42s and the 44s back in the early 90s. And I was just amazed at the sheer size of some of these fish that were being caught out of Lake O during the Great Ontario Salmon Hunt. But Jim, as always, my friend, thank so much for joining us. Thanks for giving us a step back in time and letting us know what it was like when the salmon were first introduced. And as anglers, were you excited? Were you not excited? I really appreciate your time.
Back in the olden days.
Yeah.
I'll tell you, my body was feeling the olden days today. I got out of the truck at the gym and I was happy they had the back door open.
Oh, wow.
I didn't have to walk all the way around the parking lot in the front.
Attaboy. Well, dude, and thanks for sticking it out tonight with us. We can't thank you enough, bud. We really appreciate it.
Oh, good. Everybody be safe out there. Hope you catch a big one.
Right on. We got Lawrence Gunther coming up right after a word from our sponsor.
When it comes to Canadian food, we've got your back with flavors like lemon pepper, beer batter, campfire barbecue, lemon pepper dill, garlic butter and chives, and crispy Cajun. We've got a mix for every meal. Whether you're serving East Coast shrimp, West Coast salmon, succulent walleye, chicken wings, or veggies, we've got you covered. Coat your food in outdoor flavors. Available online or at these fine retailers.
There he is, the one and only Lawrence Gunther, and a tip of the hat to you, my friend, because I know you've been busy. I felt bad because it was a little last minute. I know we had talked about what we were going to discuss tonight when it comes to the salmon, but you got tasked with bringing us up to date in terms of the timeline, the history, how we got to where we were to how we are now, and some of the pinnacles or landmarks, benchmarks, whatever you want to call it along the way. So I know you've been busy doing that. First and foremost, how you doing tonight, Lawrence?
I'm doing well, buddy. And yourself? You sound good.
Absolutely. I'm excited because, as I said, like this is something that we can talk about because it's in our own backyard, and the fact that the fishing has been like, it's absolutely, it's unique. I don't know if other years have ever produced this many fish, but I think the takeaway for me from this year was actually having a lot of the charter captains step up and say, hey, listen, never mind just going on my boat. Never mind booking a charter with me. You folks need to get out here because the fishing for salmon, the salmon fishing on Lake Ontario is off the charts. Don't pass up this opportunity because we never know if this is going to come again. And from everyone that I have spoken to that knows anything about salmon or follows the salmon fishing on Lake Ontario and the Great Lakes on social media agrees. This has been just a banner crop. It has been one of the best years on record.
Lake Ontario is doing so well on many levels for sure. And to see this, you read reports that people are saying, if you want to catch Pacific salmon, Lake Ontario is the best place in North America to catch Pacific salmon.
And that's hard to believe. Like if you think about that, like I understand where they came from. I understand why they got introduced. But to your point, I downloaded a video because it has not been this banner year in all of the Great Lakes. And I'm sure there's some anglers out there that might disagree, depending on where they are, depending on how often they're out on the water. But this is a really cool video. So before we get into some of the timelines, Lawrence, let's have a look at this.
Sounds good.
Lake Michigan and Lake Huron are actually one giant body of water, separated only by the Straits of Mackinac. Same lake, same ecology, right? Not exactly. When it comes to fish populations and invasive species, Lake Huron in recent years has unexpectedly seen a surge in native species such as lake trout, walleye, smallmouth bass, and emerald shiners. How did this happen? This is a story about how Mother Nature has, once again, trumped the hand of man. For thousands of years, lake trout ruled both Lakes Michigan and Huron, feasting on a buffet of smaller fish. But by the 1950s, the lake trout had all but disappeared due to overfishing and the arrival of invasive sea lamprey. Lampreys are aquatic vampires, eel-like creatures that make their living sucking blood out of big fish like lake trout. They slithered their way into the Great Lakes through the man-made canals of the St. Lawrence Seaway. By the 1960s, scientists had developed a poison to control the lampreys, but it was too late. The trout were all but gone, which led to an explosion of Atlantic Ocean alewives, which took the same path into the Great Lakes as the lampreys. Scientists needed a new predator fish to control the alewives and turned to the Pacific Ocean for a ferocious fighting fish that would soon become a favorite of Great Lakes anglers, the salmon. Turns out, like the alewives, the salmon could thrive in the fresh water of the lakes, in part because they had so many alewives to eat. Scientists weren't sure these saltwater natives could reproduce in the Great Lakes, so a massive stocking program began. Millions upon millions of these fish have been stocked annually since the mid-1960s. But the notion the salmon would not breed in the Great Lakes turned out to be flat wrong, and this created an overdose of the predators, again threatening the lake's balance. The explosion in salmon was compounded by yet another wave of invaders, the zebra and quagga mussels. They soon smothered the bottom of the lakes, filtering from the water the same plankton alewives depended upon. The result? A crash in the alewife population. Too many salmon were eating them from above, and too many plankton-gobbling mussels were outcompeting them for food down below. Then the salmon crashed in the wake of the alewives' demise. Only small populations of each remain in Lake Huron today. But this time, the lake didn't need any scientific re-engineering to revive it. Instead, Mother Nature did her work, thanks in part to the arrival of yet another invasive species, the round goby. Unlike alewives, gobies can eat the invasive mussels, and native fish can eat the gobies. The arrival of the gobies was good news in another way. It turns out alewives carry an enzyme that block lake trout from being able to naturally reproduce. Gobies don't have the same toxic effect, and this has led to a boom in naturally reproducing lake trout. Today, there may be fewer overall fish in Lake Huron than there was historically, but scientists say the ecosystem has returned to a more natural, self-sustaining state.
Great video. That was extremely educational and certainly gives us an overview of some of our adjacent Great Lakes that we don't maybe get a chance to fish on, but it's interesting always to learn the state of the fisheries no matter where they are. But a great timeline, great description of how they came. But I got to ask you, because you are a man that is just full of knowledge and you're able to find it if we don't know it. When was the first recorded stocking of salmon?
Man, it was in the 1800s, right? This went way back. So first of all, I think what this video does, and this is important, it links the introduction of sea lamprey into the Great Lakes with the fall of many of our native fish species. And that's an important understanding, because everyone thought the Atlantic salmon, which was a landlocked salmon in Lake Ontario, it didn't leave the lake. It didn't go to the ocean. It just stayed in Lake Ontario, went up the rivers and spawned. Everyone thought that got overfished and wiped out because of all the mills, all the water wheels on all the creeks that blocked all the tributaries that fed into Lake Ontario in the 1800s. So they lost their habitat. They lost their spawning habitat. They were overfished and the population collapsed. There's no doubt that had something to do with it. But we also know that sea lamprey entered Lake Ontario in 1880. Mm-hmm. And by 1946, they were in Lake Superior. That's huge, right? That knowledge is huge, because these sea lamprey literally decimated lake trout, Atlantic salmon, and many of the other native fish populations in the Great Lakes. So there was active population replanting going on in that period from 1860 to 1960. For 100 years, we tried to rebuild fish stocks of different salmon populations with no luck. And I've got some of these numbers here. If I can share them with you if you want.
Absolutely. 1800s we've been doing this?
For 100 years, from 1860 to 1960, we were doing this and we had no luck in any of it.
Wow. Okay. Yeah. No, definitely interested.
So 5 million Atlantic salmon fry were put into Lake Ontario in 1866. 5 million to no effect. And, that's a lot of that's a lot of fry, right? 5 million. And you think that would have taken off, but they just didn't have a chance. And they said, again, it had to do with natural issues, like barriers and so on. But 13 million Chinook and landlocked Atlantic salmon, not native Lake Ontario Atlantic salmon, but other Atlantic salmon, 13 million were introduced in 1873, and nothing came of it. Nothing came of it. 13.
You're saying that many Atlantic salmon were introduced, and we know,
and Chinook in 1873. 13 million. And it didn't work.
And just let's take a step back. So when did we start basically installing dams? When did we start damming the St. Lawrence and other areas of the Great Lakes?
So we started creating sort of channels on the St. Lawrence in the mid 1800s because we wanted to get ships from the Atlantic Ocean up into the Great Lakes. So there was paddle wheelers and steamships and sailboats going up and down the St. Lawrence in the 1800s. In the mid 1800s, it was happening already. And as soon as we made that possible, the sea lamprey came in. And by 1880, they were in Lake Ontario. And like I said, by 1946, they were all the way up into Lake Superior.
Okay, that's interesting. That's really interesting. Okay,
so that's a lot earlier than I think a lot of people thought. Everyone linked it to the opening of the St. Lawrence Seaway in the 1950s, right? But in fact, this started way before. This started back in 1880.
Which is what I thought, because, one of the things, too, we talk about Chinooks and we talk about cohos. We don't necessarily talk a lot about Atlantic salmon, but they were there, like the lake trout were there back in the early times. And I mean, as far back as we can chronologically unveil and share science, we know that lake trout and Atlantic salmon were in the Great Lakes. And the thing was, at that point, the Atlantics were going back to sea and coming back in the fall or maybe the spring.
No, the Atlantic salmon in Lake Ontario never went to the sea.
They never went to the sea.
No, they stayed in Lake Ontario. They went up the tributaries and then they stayed in Lake Ontario. They were considered landlocked fish. They never went to the sea. So it was a very unique subset of the Atlantic salmon population.
Interesting. Okay, I didn't know that. I just learned something. I kind of thought they did, and it was the Atlantic Ocean that basically allowed us the introduction of Atlantic salmon in Lake Ontario. Okay, so with that knowledge that Atlantic salmon existed in Lake Ontario, I'd like to think that sort of paved the way to say that, when this alewife population bloom exploded, that we knew that there was a good possibility that salmon could survive and exist in the Great Lakes to help circumvent that population. But I'm sure there's more dates that you have that lead up to that.
Oh yeah, lots happened before the alewife came in. Lots happened. So in 1955, we had the first successful stocking program in the Great Lakes, and it was pink salmon in Lake Superior. That was the first time in 100 years, starting in 1860. It was the first time in 100 years we actually had some success with stocking a salmon, some sort of salmon species in the Great Lakes, and it was pink salmon in Lake Superior.
Interesting. So the existence of pink salmon today, is it possible that the strain is quite natural that run up the St. Mary's River?
Oh yeah, like they've all they have definitely habituated into the top three Great Lakes, like Superior, Huron and Michigan, there are pink, there are Pacific, there are coho, and there are what's that other little? Hang on.
I'm gonna say Chinook, but I don't.
Oh, Kokanee. Kokanee is the other one.
Oh,
so there's Kokanee, pink, coho, and Chinook.
Kokanee. You mean Kokanee?
Kokanee, yeah.
Yeah, Kokanee.
Sorry,
Yes,
Kokanee.
yes. Okay.
Yeah. So Kokanee, pink, Chinook, and coho.
Yeah.
Are now found in the upper Great Lakes, the upper 3 Great Lakes. Not in great numbers, but they are naturally occurring.
Really? So there's Kokanee in Superior?
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, in the tributaries. Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah, they're still occurring. Not in great numbers, but it's amazing, that we tried all these things and it happened.
Interesting. All right. That's and yeah, that's Steve. I would agree. It's got to be 100% natural. That's really cool. Interesting. All right. Where are we headed next?
Okay, Okay, so the first coho and Chinook that took root, and it happened in 1966 to 1970. And there was 15 million coho, 15 million coho and 6 million Chinook were put into Lake Ontario in 1966 through 1970. Now, understand that the Great Lakes Fishery Commission was created in 1955. They started getting a hand on all these stocking efforts from both sides of the border. They started coordinating this, and saying, look, we got to work together. And they also researched and came up with lampricide. And that was interesting. And I'm trying to find out exactly when they started using lampricide. It was invented. It was discovered by Great Lakes Fishery Commission scientists. They came up with that concoction. It's a poison. And they started using it in around the 1960s in the tributaries where they discovered large numbers of baby lamprey, sea lamprey. And it would kill those lamprey before they would develop those horrific mouths with all the teeth, right? Because those lamprey will live in the tributaries for 3 or 4 years before going back into the lake. So if you can kill them in the tributaries, if you can find them and then kill them, that we now kill over 90% of the lamprey that are being born, naturally in our tributaries throughout the Great Lakes. 90% to 95% of the sea lamprey are being killed through this lampricide program. It costs about $20 million US a year to operate throughout the Great Lakes. And that's DFO pays for that. The United States pays for that. Some of the states get involved with this. It's a jurisdictional effort. And without that lampricide program, in the various tributaries, we would be completely wiped out. That is a scientific fact. All the salmon, all the lake trout, all those fish that we love, walleye too, they would all be wiped out. And we saw a little trace of this during COVID, because during COVID, you couldn't travel. And because you couldn't travel in 2020, the scientists that normally introduce the lampricide into the various tributaries couldn't go, get in cars and trucks and travel and do their work. So in 2020, there was no lampricide introduced. They started in 2021 coming back and introducing it. And by 2022, they were hitting about 75%. And they saw that in 2023, fish with 3, 4, 5, 6 wounds, lamprey wounds. And now they think in 2024, it's under control again. So that may have something to do with this bounce back of the salmon population as well, right? That the lamprey population is under control again after losing control in 2020, 2021. So
what's interesting about that statement is, there are some that would argue that some of and just here locally in the Credit River, we have Ivano, I believe is his name, and it wades through the Credit River on a regular basis, and he has shared, I want to say, horrifying video of a number of lamprey, small lamprey, not large, but it would suggest that they're actually starting to increase in numbers, and
they shot up like just 2 years of missing the lampricide program, and the numbers shot up like crazy, And,
So
and we saw in 2023, we saw a lot of wounded fish apparently were being reported.
So here we are, we're back in this. I want to say it's probably the 50s. Lamprey are starting to make it into the Great Lakes. They are robbing the natural fish, the native fish, to a point where now the forage base explodes. Jim and I were talking before we went on live, and it was interesting to see that one of the first salmon stockings that sort of it jumps out at you is sockeye in Lake Michigan. Obviously they didn't do very well because we don't see sockeye typically anywhere in the Great Lakes, but that was one of the first introductions. Then of course the Great Lakes Commission that you mentioned realized not too long after the lamprey had decimated the natural fish that all of a sudden now we've got a bait fish, we got a forage fish problem, and we need something to counteract that. So here we are, as you said, in the 60s. And we have revisited the idea to now stock salmon in the Great Lakes, typically Lake Ontario.
Yeah. So and Michigan as well, right? So Michigan really took off because it was a barren lake, and in 1970, over 575,000 coho were caught in Lake Michigan. So 575,000 coho salmon were caught in Lake Michigan in 1970. That's a good number, right? That's that by recreational anglers. So you could see that program from 1960 to 1970, 1965, 1970, combined with the lampricide treatment of tributaries, was starting to pay off. Like we started seeing some good numbers in Lake Michigan. Now, when did alewife show up on the scene? It's hard to say, but we do know they came in with they didn't swim up the St. Lawrence River. They came, I think, with the ships, right? With in the ballast water.
Yeah.
And they were introduced. And at that point, the Cisco, which was the natural forage food of a lot of Great Lakes fish, that population had been more or less beat down as well, right? So there was not a lot of competition for these alewife, and there was not a lot of freshwater predators in the Great Lakes to eat these alewife. So yeah, their population shot up like crazy, and because we had, like I said, from 1860 to 1960, nothing we could do was successful in introducing any predatory fish in the Great Lakes. But then 1965 to 1970, we were starting to have success with the lampricides and the alewife population showing the food base there. So we had a whole bunch of things coming together, and we started having success after 100 years of failure.
So there you go, and that was what I was just going to say. Now all of a sudden it seems like we have a balance. We've introduced a top predator that can keep these numbers down. We're not seeing these dead pools of alewife like we were. So cottagers, beachgoers, folks that love to even just walk up and down the shores of Lake Ontario weren't seeing all these dead fish, and the nuisance was now gone. But there was now a balance in the ecosystem. So you've got the salmon in there, you've got the lamprey under control, the alewife are under control, and now all of a sudden you get the zebra mussels. Balance, unfortunately, tips to one side, and it was the 80s when zebra mussels came into the Great Lakes.
Yeah, probably in the 80s, and they spread pretty quickly throughout the Great Lakes. And then not long after, the quagga mussels, which can live in deeper water. Zebra mussels are more along the shore in the inshore area.
Yeah.
And then the quagga mussels can live in deeper water. So they're slightly bigger. They need less light to survive. And so they compete with the zebra mussels in terms of territory. But you can see this too, like Lake Superior, Lake Huron, Lake Michigan, they're not really, high nutrient level lakes, right? They're clear water lakes. They don't have a lot of nutrients in them. So they're really, they really support slow growing fish like lake trout. Lake trout can live in that area where they don't need a lot of food. They're not ravenous, predators like coho and Chinook salmon that need a ton of food because they only live 3 to 5 years.
Right.
Lake trout can live 100 years. They don't need to grow fast. They can eat, a little bit all the time. So that's why they did fine on Cisco. But and they could live in these lakes, these upper Great Three Lakes that had lower nutrients levels. And when the alewife started to have to compete with the zebra mussels and the quagga mussels for nutrients, and the alewife population started dropping off rapidly in Lake Michigan, you lost the salmon.
Yeah.
And the lake trout didn't care though. The lake trout came back because they're not dependent that much. And maybe it was those round-head gobies, and maybe the cisco are coming back, but definitely the lake trout are coming back, and walleye and other populations, they're filling the void that the Pacific salmon left behind when they sort of disappeared from those three lakes. But then you think of Lake Erie, right? Lake Erie is super, super full of nutrients. That's why they have all those algae blooms. Where does Lake Erie dump into? Dumps into Lake Ontario. So Lake Ontario is a very highly nutrient-rich lake. So it can support quagga mussels, zebra mussels, and alewife. It has enough nutrients coming in from Lake Erie. It can support all of that. And that's why you see the alewife population doing reasonably well in Lake Ontario. You know, at some point, the IJC, International Joint Commission, and the Great Lakes Fishery Commission researchers thought the alewife population was going down, and would eventually disappear. But it stabilized in Lake Ontario. And if anything, it bounced back a little bit in the 2-3 years in terms of numbers of alewife. And if you go out with these anglers and you know, these charter captains, and they go over these populations of alewife, you know, and it's just a cloud that starts 20 feet below the surface, goes down to 100 feet down. It's just like an apartment building size cloud of alewife. And you see them on the fish finders. It's impressive.
It is. It is. And all those who know exactly what you're talking about would 100% agree. And I would have to say it was at this time that I kind of got, I want to say, into the fishing industry, because I got invited to some stakeholder meetings, and my first introduction to Great Lakes salmon was not a good one. I remember being up in Owen Sound. It was sponsored by the Fish and Wildlife Advisory Board. The Great Lakes Commission was there. There were a lot of charter captains from the American side, typically Lake Michigan. And they literally drew a line across the midpoint of Lake Michigan. And they basically said, there are no salmon anymore south of that line. There might be a few north of that line. And unfortunately, it was being tabled that they were going to shut the salmon fishing down. Well, I tell you, I maybe I got hit with one, but there was literally furniture being thrown around at that meeting. And this was my first experience in the fishing industry. And it was it was ugly.
Oh yeah. And you know, you have these charter boats, right? They're bringing customers out on Lake Michigan to catch 25, 30 pound salmon. And now they're catching 5 pound lake trout. Yeah. They're catching buckets of 5 pound lake trout, but you can't compare a 5 to 10 pound lake trout with a 25 to 30 pound salmon in terms of the fight and, you know, just an amazing experience of catching a salmon. You know, they're so ferocious, they're jumping, all of that, right? So it's apples and oranges.
So at that, I'll never forget that stakeholders meeting. I didn't really have a horse in the race because I was there on behalf of the walleye. And at that point, you know, I was helping supplement our M&R with some of the walleye stocking, hence the reason I was there. And I knew then how good the walleye fishery was about to become in Lake Huron, because I had been seeing the numbers. I was hearing the stocking. And of course, the big fight back then was, why, if the salmon population is so bad, why are we stocking still so many lake trout? If they're naturally reproducing, why are we stocking so many lake trout? Our salmon fishery is suffering. And as I said, it got heated. It got very heated. And then, of course, some of them are like, why aren't you standing up? Why aren't you upset? And I said, well, I'm here as a walleye stakeholder. And then they were like booing me out of the auditorium. Like, what are you even here for? You got nothing to do with it. And anyway, so needless to say, I knew that Lake Huron was going to experience the kind of walleye bloom that they are experiencing right now. And all those who fish Lake Huron know exactly what I'm talking about. The walleye population on Lake Huron is A-OK.
Oh yeah. However, they have those walleye tours there, you know, the tournaments on Lake Huron and on the American side, and they're just bringing in big bags of big fish. It's incredible.
Yeah, it really is. And it, you know, it's nice to see, of course, when you start talking about, you know, Georgian Bay and some of the big rivers like the Moon River, the French River, that always had big populations of walleye that ran up those tributaries. the numbers are really starting to increase. Especially I'm seeing on the Moon, which is encouraging, because there was a time when it wasn't so good. But needless to say, so that brings us up to the zebra mussels. And we now start to see the alewife population in peril. Let's just say there's not the balance that we first saw in the 80s. Now in the 90s, we're starting to see that imbalance because of zebra mussels. And then all of a sudden, the round goby appear. And
I don't know enough about the round goby. I don't know if that's contributing to the lake trout and walleye population expansion in Michigan and Huron. If you look at the commercial fishing, it's not doing that well on Lake Huron for whitefish. That's dropping way off, and that into Lake Huron and into Lake Superior, the east end of Lake Superior, that whitefish population and the commercial fishery is really suffering.
Okay.
So they're not doing that well. So why is that? Is that just overfishing? It could just be overfishing, right? And there's a lot of people doing going after whitefish in that part of of Ontario in the United States. So it could just be that. But I tell you, the other thing we got to watch for, there's a lot of environmental advocates who are fighting hard to get the level of nutrients in Lake Erie reduced, and they're looking at at agriculture and sewage treatment facilities as the big problems. And they want that, dealt with, and they want to get the blue-green algae situation on Lake Erie, under control. But if you reduce significantly the nutrient level within Lake Erie, because of through better sewage treatment facilities and more stringent regulations on agricultural operations and how they disperse their the manure and so forth, that's going to impact Lake Ontario, right? That means much, less nutrient-rich water entering Lake Ontario, and Lake Ontario's nutrient level is going to drop, and that could then put the alewife population in danger, because now they're competing with the zebra mussels and the quagga mussels for a far lower level of nutrients in the water, which means the alewife population is going to be the first one to go. That's going to be the first one to drop. And if that happens, it could be that the salmon fishing in Lake Ontario gets impacted the same way it is in Michigan.
Interesting. Wow. Well, that is a great timeline of events. And do you have anything else to share, Lawrence, before we let you go?
Go fish in Lake Ontario, man. It's an amazing fishery, right? Even the scientists are freaking out. The scientists say Lake Ontario is an amazing fishery. And what they're saying is at least half the Pacific and coho salmon on Lake Ontario are producing naturally now. So there's no more of this put and take attitude of what's happening at the mouths of the rivers and the dams of the rivers, where you just think, hey, these fish are not successfully breeding anyway, so we can just snag them out of here and bring them home and eat them, or harvest their roe. It's all going to be wasted anyways, and there's no bears that are going to eat these fish. So, it's just going to rot in the bottom of the rivers all winter and on the shores anyway. So might as well just, get some sort of use out of them. That's not the case. And because it's not the case, because over half of the Pacific, the Pacific salmon in Lake Ontario are successfully naturalized now and successfully breeding, we need to treat these fish with more respect in the rivers. Yeah, we treat them with, reverence on the lake, but what's happening in the rivers, we need better control. We need more conservation officers, and we need to educate anglers that these, it's important that these fish actually reach the spawning beds, because they are doing that. And if we're interfering with that, if we're stopping too much of that, that's going to be a problem with the population of salmon as well in Lake Ontario.
Agreed. 100% agree. And a great way to end your segment, as always, Lawrence, some advice of being ethical anglers and making sure that we are thinking into the future when it comes to the state of our fishery. Lawrence, again, bud, thanks so much for sharing all of that, for gathering all that information. And as always, we look forward to hearing from you again next Monday.
Thanks, buddy. Thanks for having me on.
No problem. All righty. We're going to have Jay Barnucz and Mark Penner up after a word from Jay's sponsor.
Want to know the difference between power bait and other soft plastics? Ask the fish. Berkeley scientists have. Thousands of flavors tested on thousands of fish. Natural. Man-made. Every bait that's ever hit the water. No matter the shape, size, or color, power bait is the only one that is scientifically proven. Fish bite and will not let go.
All right, gentlemen, we need to now discover, now that we've done a timeline of how we have gotten to where we are now, I think we've done everything we can to sort of educate folks on salmon fishing and its existence in the Great Lakes. We've introduced, the imbalance that we have also experienced with the fishery. But here we are now, 2024. And I have to say, again, I'm not a salmon connoisseur. I can't even say that I target these fish. But when you hear the buzz that is Lake Ontario salmon, and you have charter captains that are saying, guys, never mind my boat, never mind his boat, just get out and experience what is a unique fishing experience for this year when it comes to salmon. I need to know, where are your guys' heads at when it comes to why? And I want to introduce and thank Mark Penner from Grimsby Tackle for joining us tonight, because I'll tell you, and this was a great idea by Jay Barnucz to bring you on, because as a store owner, that a lot of your product is geared towards salmon fishing. I am sure you get a lot of people's opinions, especially the anglers that are targeting these fish on a regular basis, why this year is so different than other years.
Yeah. Hey, Scotty, thanks for the opportunity, and Jay as well. Yeah, it's been a special season for sure on Lake Ontario. Couple factors at play. Overall, there's just a lot of fish in the system, and lots of people have been out fishing and enjoying it. That's the bare bones to what's been going on. Probably we've seen, our salmon fishing starts, if I may take a few minutes, for those that are not totally familiar, I'll kind of quickly lay out the landscape of how a typical fishing season is on Lake Ontario. We generally try to get started as soon as we can. In most seasons, this year we didn't have hardly any winter at all, so we didn't really have to wait for docks to thaw out. But for the most part, we get our boats in mid-late March. We'll usually kind of warm up fishing for brown trout, very shallow for a couple weeks. And once that water kind of hits around 42 degrees, 43 degrees on the surface, we start to see salmon showing up. Now, I'm talking about the South Shore primarily, usually from the Niagara River down towards Grimsby, so about a 40-mile stretch. And that's when we usually start to see the salmon. And we have very good salmon fishing. And it usually peaks around late April through second, third week of May. That's when we kind of see our best spring fishing. And then, as that Lake Erie water is warming up and it pushes, down through the Niagara River and it pushes out into Lake Ontario, the rest of the lake starts to warm up. And then a lot of those salmon that have come from, the depths from their wintering grounds, they come into the South Shore to feed, because that's where the warm, green, healthy water is. Then they start to disperse and things start to set up all across the lake, usually by early June. We usually, the fishing kind of will get a little slow mid-late May for a week or two. We call that transition time. And then, and it happened, that first, I think the second week of June really is when the fishing just started to go off the hook everywhere at once. And, and it usually peaks, from mid-June through mid-July. And then, and we're kind of getting to that point now where we have our next little transition time where, it probably slows down a little bit noticeably. And then, the salmon, the mature salmon, the ones that are going to spawn, they're going to what we call stage, and they're going to kind of set up and hang out in front of the river or the harbor mouth where they are going to go through their reproduction process. And, they'll kind of hang out anywhere from like 80 to 100 feet of water for a little while. And then as, nature calls and the conditions allow, they're going to start creeping in slower and slower right up to the pier mouths. And then usually, once the nights start cooling at the end of August, early September, we get some rain and all the ingredients come into play. And then that's when they start to run through the month of September into early October.
That's interesting stuff. And thanks for sharing that. And again, Mark, thanks so much for joining us. Jay, let's quickly go over the identification. We've heard a lot of species of salmon that have been introduced into the Great Lakes, namely Chinook and coho are the big ones. We also know that Atlantic salmon still exist in Lake Ontario and perhaps in other parts of the Great Lakes. And then we've heard a great success story of pink salmon up in Lake Superior that on St. Mary's River. Any identifiable features that you want to focus in on when it comes to identifying these salmon?
Sure. Well, I'm going to post a link in the chat. If anyone gets a chance to check it later, it's probably my favorite fish ID, salmon trout ID chart. C. Grant put it out many years ago, and it does a great job of explaining it. Pre-show, actually, Mark hit it right on the head. Cohos and Chinooks are hard to distinguish from each other. And it's the spotting on the tail is probably the easiest way for most people to identify them. You can look at length of anal fin and things like that, anal ray counts, things like that. But the fact that a Chinook tail is fully spotted and a coho is no spots, you might get a couple spots at the top, but not like a Chinook where it's top and bottom spots. So that's probably the easiest way to tell them apart, especially during the salmon season, like out in the lake season where guys are catching them and they're still silver. They do color up a little different in the fall when the mature fish are gone up to spawn. They can look quite strikingly different, actually, Chinooks and coho. But in the lake, they can be hard to tell apart. And I think the spotted tail trick is probably the best one for most anglers out there. So
out in the blue water, as they call it, this is what you would call a typical Chinook, and usually they're fairly lightly colored. Yep. They do have that chrome tinge to them. Sometimes, depending on where they're caught, how they've been stressed, you get that rainbow hue in the fish as well. But typically, as you said, when they start to stage and run upriver, they get a lot darker. And their appearance definitely changes.
Yeah, and the gums on the Chinook are really black. The cohos aren't as black, but that's a variable trait, I find. But I think that spotted pattern is the best one. And typically, too, cohos don't usually grow as big as Chinooks. There's some stuff, but all that's kind of variable. So they can be hard to tell apart. They both taste the same, if anyone's wondering. So
that's a good point. Yeah, never even thought of that.
Yeah, so I know some guys will prefer cohos over Chinooks, but I think if prepared properly, they're both pretty tasty. So, we also have, you brought up pinks. Pinks are an interesting one too, Scotty, because pinks don't show up very often in the Great Lakes. They were introduced like literally by accident in Lake Superior. Ironically, there's pink runs in Lake Ontario streams every year.
Wow.
Yeah, Trevor will tell you that he's caught some nice, like humpback pink salmon in some Lake Ontario tributaries. It's a bit of a sleeper story. They show up. There's nice runs of coho in Lake Erie tributaries, but it's not like Lake Ontario tribs. The Lake Ontario tribs, and I think it's a bit of a good news story. I put a comment in the chats where it's, and Mark, you touched on this pre-show. Like, there's just been a lot of reproduction going on too. Like, we're kind of at a crossroads where typically the U.S. has higher stocking levels than we do, and we could debate if we should stock more or not. But the natural reproduction in Lake Ontario tributaries is quite good, and that's probably good news for those streams, right? Like healthy systems, and this is something that I fought a lot early in my career when I was working at the Central Lake Ontario Conservation Authority at the height of the Atlantic salmon reintroduction, which was controversial. I'm not going to get into it. This is like a political discussion. But my argument to the people that were against the Atlantic salmon reintroduction is I said, look, the government's putting money into fixing up streams.
making them healthier, habitat restoration, monitoring. I said, this will benefit all the fish that use these streams. Whether the Atlantics take hold or not, these healthier systems are going to contribute more steelhead, more Chinook, and more coho to Lake Ontario. And look, 15 years later, these systems are doing really well. And, you know, kudos to the agencies that are out managing these streams. A lot of it's the conservation authorities doing the monitoring and the work. So it's benefiting us a lot. And there's actually data out there that suggests that naturally reproduced salmon and trout are a more viable population than stockfish.
Makes sense.
And it's especially from the steelhead side. Steelhead are a little different because they're repeat spawners. So their life history is different. But those naturalized fish, they're not native, they're naturalized, they're breeding here. And they tend to do better that are reproduced here versus the stocked ones. Stocked ones survive well too, but not as well as those naturalized ones. That's what the biology tells us, which is pretty cool. So
it is cool. So I have to ask the question, and Rocky asked it earlier on. I was able to find the comment. Is it true that only spawning fish run up the river?
It's a good question. Like, I think you're going to get wanderers around the mouth all the time that are kind of curious about going up. But for those naturalized Pacific salmon, so cohos and Chinooks and pinks, pretty much they've decided probably long before they start to turn color. They've decided, I'm going this year. And it can vary 3 to 5 years. You know, if all the 3-year-old fish decide to go up 1 year, like we lose a lot of those bigger fish because those bigger fish are probably 4 and 5-year-old fish. You know, Mark and I, you and I have talked about this a little bit briefly where, you know, during some of the years where they collected eggs and sperm, they probably didn't consider whether it was a 3-year-old fish or a 4-year-old fish or a 5-year-old fish. And what do we want to catch, Scotty? Do we want to catch small fish or big fish?
Big fish, man.
So these are some of the management choices that probably weren't talked about back in the day. And but I think we could, you know, we don't have to debate those things. I think that reality is a lot of these fish, they're set to spawn, they're gonna spawn, and but you know, right now the fishery is doing really well. And Rocky, like, it's a great time. I encourage people, like, I'm not a big fan of fishing for spawning salmon. I used to when I was younger because it was fun. There's probably no better way to hook into a 30-pound class fish without having a boat in Ontario.
Amen.
Unless maybe you're carp fishing. They are easy to snag, whether you're trying to or not. They're big, right? Yeah. So I'm not encouraging people to go snagging for them because that is not legal. But just to go and catch a fish of that size can really motivate people, especially younger people, and teaching them how to handle the fish, teach them why it's important not to snag fish, right? So, yeah, I think it's a fishery that can be enjoyed by lots of people. You know, Mark, you're actively involved, like not just the manager at Grimsby Tackle, but dude, you do a ton of work with the St. Catharines Fish and Game Club and local tournaments. Like, tell us a bit about some of the grassroots work that goes on in that Niagara area, because there's some really cool. And Scotty, we talk about grassroots fishing programs and groups on this show all the time. Tell us a bit about that Niagara area, Mark, and what's going on down there.
Yeah, no, for sure. The St. Catharines Game and Fish, you know, we're involved in many different ways with the fishery. One of the neatest things that we've done since, I think, 2008 is we have a pen stocking project. We're in cooperation with the ministry. We, as well as there's other clubs and groups around the lake that do it too. You know, where we're allotted a certain amount of fish that we hold in pens for about 4 or 5 weeks every spring. And, you know, there's 2 reasons why we do it. One is imprinting. We feel that when the fish hold in those in the current waters for extra time, they're going to recognize it as their home waters. So when they reach their age of maturity to go through their spawning process, they're going to recognize that water and return back there. And again, you know, create you know, an inshore opportunity for the shore and the small boat anglers. And the other part of it is we feed them, and it makes them a little hardier. They put on a little bit more weight so that when they're released, they're stronger and hopefully less susceptible to predation as well. We also do, we run our spring salmon derby, which has been going on for over 45 years now. It runs April and May every year. We've got other events and tournaments that we do that is, related to the salmon fishery as well. And we've got a number of other very good projects as well, just in general that, encourage the local fishing that we have and some grassroots programs to get kids and families out fishing as well.
That's awesome. And of course, with all these joint ventures, all these pen projects, Metro East Anglers, you have so many different hatcheries that are helping sustain what is and what we are experiencing is the phenomenal fishery that is Lake Ontario. I have to ask, because I know back in the 90s when I was helping groups like Metro East, corral fish in the spring and in the fall, it was remarkable to see naturally occurring fish, ones that were not fin clipped. And I would have to say that in terms of a percentage, it wasn't like it is now. Do either of you have an idea what we're looking at as a percentage of natural versus stock fish in Lake Ontario?
I'll look at Mark for that one. I don't know the latest data that's come out of Lake Ontario from that perspective. What do you think, Mark?
Well, so interestingly enough, from around 2000, I might be a little off of my timeline, 2007 or 8 until maybe 2012 or so, all the fish in both Ontario and New York State that were stocked were all had their adipose fin clipped for a set number of years. And I think it was only 4 or 5 years. It was somewhere around that time span. And the idea was that, and they had a lot of surveys going on. They had journals that were provided for most, stakeholders, guides, charter boats, and anglers that wanted to as well, diaries. And we were asked to, provide as much data as possible, but primarily they wanted to know, how many fish we were catching each year, that were had their adipose fin or not. And I believe at the conclusion of that project, it was around a 50-50%.
And that's kind of where I thought it would be as well. So when I see Ed, when he used to do the Bowmanville lift, 95% of the kings were natural, whereas 5% were considered stock fish. When I see numbers like that, I'm intrigued, because that just goes to show that maybe we didn't think they were going to be as reproductive as they are when we see those kind of numbers. But the fact that they've existed as long as they have, and they're doing as well as they are currently right now, would suggest, we may have not necessarily hit the mark when it comes to how productive and prolific these fish could be.
Yeah, and to that point, though, they don't really stock many. It's a much, I'll say, reduced stocking numbers when we go from, let's say, Scarborough and heading east along the north shore of Lake Ontario, just because they've recognized, the potential for natural reproduction in those cleaner streams that are, sustainable for that. So, nowadays you are going to see it's almost all natural fish that are returning to those streams. It's, when you go from Port Credit and then going down around the southwestern Lake Ontario shoreline, that's where our stocking numbers are bumped up higher, because we just don't have the suitable spawning grounds for it.
Gotcha. Now, of course, there are some that would argue that the numbers have always been there, but there's something unique about this year that has flipped the switch and has made them, they've just turned on. I don't know how to describe it. Can you share anything from any of your clients, those who come in and purchase product from your store, some of their ideas, some of their theories as to why this year has been such an incredible year when it comes to the fish actually biting?
Yeah, well, there are a lot of theories out there, but in the end, I just think it is it's just more natural fish that are in the system, and we've got a lot more anglers that are out on the lake now, and a lot of anglers are active on on various platforms and a lot of communication and information is being shared rapidly. So I don't think our numbers aren't false at all. It's just all positive, and it's just been an influx of information sharing.
100%. Jay, you and I have talked at great length about the weather phenomenon that is different this year than other years. Of course, we didn't have much of a winter. We had an I would say a decelerated spring where we weren't sure if it was even going to warm up. Like, we didn't have a winter, but it was like, okay, well, where's the 30-degree temperatures, which we are now experiencing now. But the one thing that is different about this year than other years is the incredible rainfall. And I'm intrigued to know, Niagara Falls pumps an awful lot of water into Lake Ontario. Has that current stirred up the basin at all? Is there something unique about the amount of flow that I'm sure is now present in Lake Ontario because of all that rain? Would that have been it?
What's interesting about Lake Ontario streams, and I'm just going to talk about from the Ontario side because that's what I'm most familiar with. They're all pretty small, right? We're talking like the bigger ones, like the Credit, but you have Brawny Creek, 16 Mile Creek, you have Bowmanville Creek, Wilmot Creek, all these sort of classic creeks, Ganaraska River, and even some of the small ones in between. These high flows that we're getting, and I've talked to several biologists about this who are actually trout experts, and they call it like a natural enema. So it's literally all these high flows are flushing sediment out of these systems. Like, it's helping to clear out sediment, make the gravel cleaner. And sometimes it's a bit of a perfect storm for these things to happen, but I'm going to bet that these rains now, if these fish start trying to spawn in the summer, that's not good because the water temperatures aren't right. So, and I know some fish will start running up the rivers. Ed in the chat mentioned he already saw kids in Oshawa dragging a big hen up from the river. Not surprising because that part of Oshawa Creek, that bottom end, is very close to the lake. Those fish will come in and out during high water. I know a lot of times you'll see lake run browns, lake run steelhead. They'll start running in, and even Chinooks end of August. They'll start working up into rivers if it's wet enough, if the water's high enough. Some years we don't get rain until later in the fall, and we won't see those runs until after Thanksgiving. And some years by Thanksgiving, the run's done. It all depends. These small systems are so small, literally, they're so flashy that it happens so fast. But what's great about these systems is I don't think you need to have like that number that Ed put up there, 95% natural, doesn't surprise me because those fish have probably were spawned in Bowmanville Creek, the 5 years ago or 3 years prior to that, right? That's probably what's going on. And so these systems are very productive systems. Even though they're not big, they probably have a high success rate of like fish spawn per square meter. And I've seen this before on some systems, data I've looked over where this is from a steelhead perspective, but some of the smallest systems like Wilmot will produce more steelhead per square meter than some big systems because the habitat quality is just that much better. Even though the runs aren't as big, the quality is better of the habitat. And I know that on our side of the lake, our habitat quality in rivers is very good. On the U.S. side, their quality of habitat in rivers is not as good as ours typically. So they don't see as much natural reproduction as we do on our side. And I think, Mark, would you agree with that? Is that kind of the consensus out there?
Yeah, for sure. For the most part, with the obvious exception being the Salmon River.
Yeah. Like the Salmon River is like it's a mecca, right? It's well managed, very well managed river, well understood. It's a good process there in terms of how they manage it. But yeah, a lot of the other systems just don't have. Like I've gone down and I fished the Oak and the Burt, and I used to travel all across New York State as a younger man. I didn't mind rubbing elbows until guys were showing you Glocks in their vest. That's another story. But anyways, I don't like going down there anymore. It's not my cup of tea anymore. But when I was 22 years old, I'd go down and fish for browns, and no one liked us guys with the float reels from Canada back 25 years ago.
Hilarious. That is
but we had a lot of fun catching lots of fish, but those rivers are not healthy systems. They're loaded with fish, but at certain times of year, but they're not the healthy systems like we have up here. So we're spoiled up here for quality systems. And I keep stressing that because these quality systems are very resistant to a lot of issues that we could have. Like there are some urban systems that get runs, like every year salmon go up the Don River and up the Rouge River. I'm sure there's not as much reproduction in those systems as there would be in Wilmot or in the Ganney, for example. So, you know, we got to learn to, as a society, to protect those systems because, especially in Ontario, we rely on natural reproduction for maintaining our fisheries.
Amen.
That's why we have such strict controls on certain things. Like, and it is working. It works, but we sort of need to be patient and have time to do that. So,
100%. So, Mark, let's just move back a little bit. You know, Jay and I, we've had the luxury of talking a lot of Mondays. So we have basically paid witness to what everybody is seeing in terms of. It seemed like a slow start to spring, but really, as Jay and I shared, we were kind of right on the mark. Typically, previous years, we have winter, and then all of a sudden it's summer. The springs would seem to get shorter and shorter. This was the first year, in my opinion, that we had an elongated spring. With that, was there a time after that spring? Was it the first week of June? Was it the middle of June? Was it the first week of July that all of a sudden we started to see the temperatures climb? Water temperature was also climbing. And then all of a sudden it was like a wave of anglers coming in and buying product because they're like, you have no idea what's going on out here in this lake. Like, can you walk us through sort of what happened from spring to summer in terms of how the fishing improved with the weather and the temperatures?
Yeah. Well, you know, the fishing, you know, it started, we started to get decent numbers of kinks the second into the third week of April, and it was a pretty good spring. Like there was nice numbers of fish being caught during that stretch up until the May long weekend. And then as usual, you know, we did have a bit of a transition time, but it was definitely that second week of June. You know, the weather was getting nice and warm and stable. The fish were spreading out, you know, and there was, you know, suddenly fish being caught, you know, at Bronte and Port Credit and all around the Scarborough and the Islands areas. You know, it was so, you know, and for people who live there, they weren't having you know, not everybody comes down to Niagara. A lot of people do for the first 2 months of the season, but not everybody does, which is fine. But, you know, the fish just started showing up. The weather was good. People were starting to get on their summer vacations. It all just clicked at once. And I think that's kind of how it all came together.
Now, what's also interesting too is, and Jay, you might agree based on what you've seen in past years, typically some of the salmon fishing is better the further east you go from Toronto. You know, the Bluffs is kind of like the benchmark. Like, yes, you're still going to catch fish in Bronte. You're still going to catch fish in 16 Mile Creek, down around, you know, St. Catharines where you are, Mark. But typically, you know, the Bluffs and east is where the majority of the salmon were caught, especially the big ones. All of a sudden this year, it's different. Those from the Bluffs east are getting good quality fish, but they're not seeing the numbers like they are in the Port Credit area, in the Bronte area. What's the difference? I know Brad from Powell Castings brought up a theory that with all these storms that we've had a lot more east wind this summer. Is it possible that that wind has pushed the forage towards the western end of Lake Ontario, and that's why the fishing is so good?
Oh yeah, no, wind definitely plays a factor into the, you know, the migration trends of the salmon every year. And, you know, we see different, no 2 years are kind of alike back to back, you know, as far as, you know, where good fishing occurs, how long it occurs for, and, you know, what areas of the lake. But, you know, we previously for the last many years, the fishing at Bronte and Port Credit in that southwest, northwest corner of the lake typically is a little bit slower in, you know, mid-July, even, you know, late June into July. The numbers of fish just haven't always been there, especially to these numbers. But, you know, the winds for sure can impact that. And, you know, it really, the fish haven't really left a lot. There's still, a lot of fish around being caught. Like I said previously, it has slowed down a little bit in the last week or two from what we saw at the end of June and the first week of July. Well, where some anglers, we're having 30, 40 fish in a morning. They go out at 5 a.m. and they can't keep 4 rods in the water, until 10 o'clock when it finally slows down a little bit. If you're savvy enough to stay in the area where the fish are, keep rods in the water and everything, you were capable of hitting those numbers for sure. So it certainly has, come down a notch or two, it's still very good fishing. But,
Are they having to move out further? I know when we were out with Jim a week or so ago, we were roughly around the 80-foot mark. Are you finding they're a little bit closer to the blue water and they're out a little bit deeper this time of year?
Yeah, and that's mostly temperature because, as we get, our heat waves in mid-late June, that water warms up and it pushes the thermocline deeper. So those fish have to get into deeper water to stay comfortable. Salmon for the most part like to hang out in, 40 to 44 degrees for the most part. They'll certainly come in shallow, warmer water when the food is there, but they don't always like to hang out in that water for long periods of time. They like to be close to that water, but they don't always like to be in it. So the analogy that I often use is, on a summer's day, like we can think about ourselves in the afternoon, we like hanging out in the basement, where the air conditioning is, watching a ball game. But if we're hungry, we got to go where the food is. We got to go upstairs where the fridge is and get our food. It's the same thing with the salmon. They got to go up into the warm, grab a few alewives and then go back down to their comfortable area.
And speaking of which, when it comes to food, has it been more of a spoon bite? Has it been more of a plug bite? Has it been more of a cut bait bite, or a good combination of all three?
Well, since there's just been so many fish, I think anglers have been able to fish to their strength or comfort levels. It has not mattered too much. One trend I have noticed is that some anglers have been fishing a little bit. Their trolling speeds have been a little faster on average this year. Typically when we're fishing, it can be 2.2 to 2.5 miles an hour for the most part, especially for running cut bait. Cut bait, you usually have to be on the slower end of things. When you're running a mixed spread of spoons and flies, the rule of thumb is you can be a little bit faster to be a little more forgiving for speed and cover some water. And I've just heard more anglers are experimenting and they're doing very well trolling faster. And probably it's just because there's more fish in the system that they're getting success that way.
And is there any really cool takeaways from this year when it comes to a certain bait, certain presentation that has been more productive than other years past?
I don't think there's been one bait that's been more productive, but over the last few years, we are seeing more anglers experiencing using herring rigs or cut bait rigs. Now, whether it's, real herring strips or if it's, plastic artificial ones. It's just been a trend that keeps growing. We believe that cut bait might take bigger fish on average, but it's hard to say. We had a 30-pounder weighed in last week at Grimsby for the salmon derby, and it was caught on a spoon.
Right?
So spoons are always going to catch fish. Spoons caught 40-pounders back in the 80s and the 90s, and they always will. So I think it's just you got to fish what your strengths are, right? It's
100%.
No different, Jay. Whether you're a top water guy or a flipping guy for bass, you're going to fish what you're most comfortable with.
Steve's asked a great question. What's more important, the ball speed or the boat speed?
Yeah, well, that's a good question. Not everybody has a device to measure your ball speed. There's different brands that have different products on the market that will tell you your ball speed. We believe the ball speed is the one to go by because you want to, run that based on what the optimal speed is for the baits that you're running in the water. So, but there's many anglers who just for many reasons choose not to use any of those devices. Cost being one thing, they are pretty pricey to use or to acquire. So, but ball speed is, I think, the most important speed, but it's not necessary.
And one last question before I get to Jay. When it comes to spoons, when it comes to flies, when it comes to flashers, is there one color that is outshining the others, or is glow a big deal this year?
Glow is always a big thing. And, black, green, and glow patterns have always dominated most of your salmon patterns for the last many years, at least since I've been involved. Whether it's a dot pattern or a ladder back pattern, but those three colors seem to dominate. Every year, it seems like there's a couple color patterns that are pretty trendy, and this year, two that I've never seen the demand for as I have this year, and that's the bloody nose pattern and a Wonder Bread pattern. So it's hard to and Carbon 14 has been another one, but they've been pretty trendy for the last couple of years.
Good to hear. Thanks for sharing that. And I'm sure a lot of anglers, charter captains, and guides are not appreciative of you sharing that information, but we are. Jay, I have to ask, now that we've talked a lot about, what has brought us to where we are today when it comes to fishing and how remarkable and unique this year's fishing experience is, I have to ask you, are we going to see the same repeat next year? Is it possible that it could even get even better?
I don't know. I think we're just at the mercy of these weather patterns, right, with these fish, because their lifespan is so short, right? 3 to 5 years. So things can happen fast. We could see the trend continue, or we could see it go the opposite, unfortunately. Like I find that what I think goes on in the lakes is with salmon and trout, my understanding is there's a lot of things that play. Forage is one. Forage is a big one. But I think that the forage levels seem pretty stable right now. I think a lot of it is just how many fish are we producing, and that's all going to be based on weather patterns and how things sort of roll out. It's no different than we talk about the boom walleye fishery we're having in Erie right now, right? Like that walleye fishery when's it going to stop? Like it's peaked and then it's just stayed peaked, like it just has stayed there. But the yellow perch fishery has dropped right off. There's still good perch fishing in Erie, but it's not like it was, and I'll go back to the 90s. I can remember going out walleye fishing on Erie in the 90s with my grandfather, and it was hit and miss. But perch fishing was phenomenal, right? And now it's the opposite. And people think because the walleye are predators, that's why there's not as many perch. It's actually not that at all. There's so many ecological things happening that right now the walleye are doing great and the perch are dropping off. And right now the Pacific salmons, the Elcos and Chinooks, they're doing great right now in Lake Ontario. And who knows how long it'll last. And I just keep telling people, if you've been thinking about going out, whether it's with a guide, and I think with most of, like, I don't know much about trolling for salmon. So for me, if I wanted to learn about it, I'm going to go out with a guide, and definitely like reach out to someone like Mark and get out there and do it. Or go to a great tackle shop. Like Jim said at the end of the show, it was a little bit like, it was kind of a dark thing that he said, but it's true. Like, would Grimsby tackle exist without the salmon fishery? And probably, but like, Mark, you guys in Grimsby Tackle have been like leading the charge for that Great Lakes trolling sport fishery for decades. Like, you guys cater to all anglers. Lord knows I buy a lot of tackle out of your store that has nothing to do with salmon, trout, and walleye. It's mostly bass and panfish. But honestly, Mark, it's you guys are the leaders of for trolling in this sort of end of the lake. I truly believe that. And you guys have built a great reputation for that. So for folks who want to get out there and enjoy this fishery while it's here, reach out to Mark at Grimsby Tackle. If he can't help you with your own stuff, he could put you in touch with a guide, I'm sure. Like, there's so many options out there. And just a great, the few times I've hung out in the shop, Mark, you guys are always about educating anglers as much as you are. Like, selling tackle is great, but you educate anglers and they're going to come back as repeat customers. I know that's what you follow, and I see that and I hear that when you're talking to people. So, and shout out to you guys too, because you guys have done some great seminars, like especially during COVID. You guys started doing like live chats, and you've had some sort of Grimsby regulars on there, and I know some of those guys are your buddies, and I'm sure you can give them a shout out later. But you guys do seminars there pretty regularly. Literally, Scotty, they have a wood burning stove in there. It's usually hotter than Hades when that thing's on, by the way. And I'm big and sweaty, so that really is not good for me. No. But it's a great shop. It's very much it's very what do I want to say, Red Fisher like shop. When you go in there, it is a small town shop right smack in the middle of like suburban Golden Horseshoe area, and it's a great place to go and just talk fishing with folks. And I recommend, if you're in that area, go by Grimsby Tackle and just talk to Mark. And there's you guys have all kinds of great staff. I keep saying your name, but you guys got lots of great help over there. So even your son Jeff is packing cut bait usually when I see stories, if he's not at home tying jigs. So everyone helps out at Grimsby Tackle. It's great.
That's awesome.
Thank you for the kind words. No, we're huge on education. We're always happy to help. Everybody starts from the beginning at some point, whether it's salmon fishing or bass fishing or whatever. So we always try and take the time, even if it's a pretty busy day, to make sure everyone's looked after and it has a good starting point. However they're trying to take advantage of the great fishing. We have a pretty good YouTube channel that's full of great clips. Mm-hmm. And we try and do monthly seminars, usually from November through March, in the store on weekends. And it's a great time. And many anglers, that attended our seminars, years ago, we've been doing them for almost 10 years now. Some of them have gone on and are guiding now and are achieving good success in local events too. So it's a pleasure to see. I had a lot of help when I first got into the trolling game many years ago, so I'm more than happy to pay it forward for the next new ones.
That's awesome. Well, gentlemen, I have to thank you for coming here, sharing as much knowledge as you have, and as I said, educating us, because at the end of the day, perhaps maybe there's folks out there like me that don't target these fish enough, and they're in our own backyard. And to Jay's point, to your point, Mark, Lawrence, as well as Jim's, don't pass up the opportunity to what is a unique year when it comes to salmon fishing, and book a charter, get out there and enjoy what is a bountiful harvest out on Lake O. But more so than that, thanks, gentlemen, for joining us tonight.
My pleasure, Scotty. Thanks for having us, man, as always.
We'll see you next week.
The opportunity was fun.
We'll see you next week, Jay, Mark. Yep. And in the meantime, you take care of yourself. And thanks again for doing this.
See you guys.
Yet another great episode. And of course, for all those with some great questions, some great content, to Mark, who came from Grimsby Tackle. Again, we really appreciated the input and some of the knowledge that we're able to now pass on to you CFNers when it comes to what patterns, what colors, how far out you got to go to get some of these fish. But at the end of the day, they're out deep enough right now that, to Jay's point, I think it's in your best interest to get a guide, get a charter, pass some money around, and let's keep this industry strong. In the meantime, thanks for all those who joined in. I love you all. Your support means the absolute world to me. And without you, there is no CFN Live. It's time to take us away. Remember, Tourney Tuesdays tomorrow. And again, we are back here on Monday. You guys have a great week. Love you all. Take care and enjoy a great week of fishing. Peace.
Well, as much as I hate to admit it, I guess we've run out of time. So I've enjoyed it, but I'm going to do something I haven't done since season 1. Turn out the lights, the party's over. They say that all good things must end.